My name is Kumi Naidoo. I'm the Executive Director of Greenpeace International. The main message to the Congress was that educators are a key part of society, that in fact they have a huge role to play in addressing all the major challenges that humanity currently faces. While I spoke mainly about climate change and the environment, I would say that the message was that whether it is economic justice, social justice, gender justice, the rights of indigenous peoples and so on, all of these struggles that are going on in the world, the message was that educators are a key part of addressing those challenges. Specifically with regard to climate change though, the message was that time is running out, that we need to build the broadest possible alliance to be able to raise their awareness and to get people to take urgent action, as well as push our governments and businesses to act much, much faster than they are currently willing to act. And particularly because teachers have access to young people, and young people throughout the world, in my observation, are much, much more concerned about the danger of climate change than older people appear to be, because of course they know that their futures are very much at stake. So the main message overall was a call for the need for us to work together, for us to break the divisions that might have existed in the past, because only if we build the strongest possible alliance of trade unions, NGOs, religious organizations, other social movements, do we stand a chance of averting catastrophic climate change. Greenpeace strongly, warmly welcomes the resolution that comes out of the Congress of Education International with regard to climate change. It has the right balance in the resolution of a range of very practical things that educators can do in their schools, in their classrooms, and in the communities where they operate. Practical things like trying to reduce the school's carbon footprint, trying to explore things like community gardens, and so on and so forth. But it also expresses the intention of educators as citizens to have a voice in the global public conversations about how to avert catastrophic climate change. And it has the advocacy component as well as the practical component of specific actions that can be taken. So we are very, very encouraged by the resolution, and as Greenpeace we are very excited about being able to work in partnership with Education International moving forward, because we think that unless unusual suspects step forward, you know, if Greenpeace says climate change is a problem and so on, people say, well, that's what Greenpeace would say. But when teacher trade unions step forward and say, we want to stand up because this is about defending the future of our children and grandchildren, it has a different kind of power, a different kind of eloquence, and a different kind of influence of public opinion. So we value this resolution very much. We think it sets the basis of very close working relationship between not just Greenpeace and Education International, but the broader environmental movement and Education International. So we embrace it very well. The important thing to note is that educators around the world have not been sitting back and waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. In many parts of the world I've seen excellent initiatives on the part of teachers in primary schools, in secondary schools, in higher education institutions. They have contributed their intellectual knowledge, their research capability and so on, which is great, and we welcome that. But we're also seeing, especially in communities where there is environmental destruction going on, that teachers are mobilizing their students to get involved. In many schools around the world, including here in South Africa, there are environmental clubs at school which teachers have facilitated, and this is sharing the responsibility of addressing it between the educator and the learner, which is also really very positive. I've seen teachers and learners working together on coastal protection. I've just come from a school now in Cape Town, where I went and addressed the school, and the kids want to know what can we do here where we live. And here in Cape Town, for example, there are many polluted rivers, and and the school is like, considering it. So I think that in addition to that, we've seen tree planting programs that schools have engaged in across the world. We've seen some schools start where there's some land where they've started permaculture and community gardens on the school premises. And while all of these things might appear that they won't have such a big impact globally, every bit counts. But importantly, by engaging young people in such activities, you're enhancing their environmental consciousness and enhancing their ability to hopefully provide leadership in the future that ensures that all forms of life on this planet, human beings, plant, animal life and so on, can coexist in a much better way than we have done in the past. It's important that we recognize that education is a basic human right. It is a human right that governments must exercise and must fulfill. The idea of turning education into a profit-making enterprise is something that is highly problematic. We have seen in South Africa, for example, what we call fly-by-night schools, where people set up schools, promise high levels of certification and so on, and before you know it, the people who collect the money and so on disappear. We've seen an exploitation of education for profit, and we think, as it's beginning to be seen now in countries that were promoting privatization of water, privatization of transport and so on, we're seeing in the UK, for example, that there is a reversal of privatization of certain public goods. And education has to be seen as a public good, and as a public good it should not be in private hands. That doesn't mean to say that there might not be some more modest roles for parts of the private sector to play in educational provisions, but yeah, what we are seeing as a tendency, which has to be resisted, is the abdication of responsibility on the part of governments. In terms of how do we actually put pressure on companies that actually put profit before people, is to ensure that people are firstly made aware. The pressure that needs to be brought has to be strong, peaceful, but very clear in the message. And I think, history shows that in every movement for justice that the world has ever seen, from slavery to anti-apartheid to civil rights in the United States, a woman's right to vote, and any number of other struggles, that educators were always part of those struggles. Right? You go and study those movements, you'll find there will be either university teachers, high school teachers, informal adult educators, and so on. And so no struggle in my mind has been won without an involvement of educators. And also we need to recognize, as somebody who comes from a working class community, in working class communities, educators are still held in very, very high regard. Within the context of a working class community, a teacher actually has quite a high sort of status economically and so on, and in terms of actual sort of respect. So when teachers get involved in these various struggles, including the struggle against the privatization of water or the privatization of, say, education, it actually is a very important moral statement that encourages many people who might not be moved to get involved. As a young person growing up in South Africa, resisting the apartheid system, when we were expelled from school for standing up against the system, the fact that there were some teachers that stood with us made it a little more easier. It wasn't that easy, but made it a little more easier to explain to our parents why we did it. If we didn't have some teachers standing with us, it would have been much more difficult, when we were expelled from school, to explain to our parents, well, we did this for our values and it's the right thing to do. And even though it doesn't mean that our parents supported it because a handful of teachers stood with us, but it kind of gave them pause to reflect and say, well, if there are teachers coming to these meetings, trying to mobilize to get the kids back into school after we're expelled and so on, our kids can't be totally crazy. So I think that and even when we talk about the partnership between trade unions and NGOs like Greenpeace, Part of what I'm committed to is, maybe today the call is on Education International to support Greenpeace and other environmental groups to push for a fair, ambitious, legally binding climate treaty. But maybe tomorrow Education International will come to us and say, actually, we need Greenpeace support to prevent mass-scale privatization of education. And that's the kind of relationship I would like to see between trade unions and NGOs.